Of in October to this agenda, we had set up James Palmieri, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, who's the new Marine One Unit police officer. We had set him up for an end of season report, and then I've put that off till 1st of next year, which is actually February 13th, so we'll have a little delay in that. But I don't think that's that time critical anyway. So we do have I had approval of the minutes, but let's just get right to our guest speaker and do the approval of minutes afterwards. We've brought here a consultant who's been operating on the Connecticut coastline for a long time, I'll just say. He's very knowledgeable in harbor management commissions, in all sorts of coastal activity, from permitting to dock applications to moorings, harbors. And his name is Jeff Stegman, and I've invited him to be with us today because I think he can get some great background on current happenings with moorings in harbors and some of the tussles that are going on there, as well as dock applications. So we thought we'd have a split agenda with him for this next half hour on mooring applications or moorings and ordinances to do with moorings and dock applications, both of which are sort of in front of us. Some of which are more in front of John Kina, who we have there.
Hello, John.
Anyways, Jeff, do you want to come and sit up here? Is that all right?
Sure.
And I asked Jeff to give, we've got sort of split topics here, but Jeff really knows his stuff about the Connecticut coastline, and I asked him to give us sort of an overview of both topics, and with the option of, if you'd like, as you talk a little bit on each topic, maybe for up to 10 minutes, people could interject with questions, or we could save it to the end. But the idea is to get everyone a little better acquainted with the two topics and some of the other practices other towns are doing.
Well, thank you very much for asking me to come here tonight. And I might say at the beginning that 33 years ago, I worked for the town on the harbor management plan at that time. My friend Larry Johnston, who prepared a draft plan that was dated 1989. I remember working with the committee at that time. And then that didn't, as you know, that effort was abandoned, if that's the right word. And then, interestingly, we did a report for the town attorney at the time, having to do with shellfish resources. And that was when I first got an introduction to the old 1800s laws that still cover shellfish, the natural shellfish beds and the private beds, the town grounds, and the distinction between local oyster ground committees, now shellfish commissions in the state. It was all a very interesting experience for me back then. So I'm here. Bill and I have talked over the years, and to the extent that some of the experience I have might be helpful, then I appreciate the chance to talk with you. But there are, back in the late 1980s, which was the beginning of the harbor management program in Connecticut. And I can cut me short if I'm going on too long, but the beginning of the harbor management program in Connecticut actually was in Norwalk. And in 1980, the Corps of Engineers came to Norwalk, or the contractor did, to dredge Norwalk Harbor. And in the east, if you're familiar with East Norwalk, they found that people on the east side of the East Norwalk Basin had built docks that went out into the federal channel and into the federal anchorage. And it was at that time, in the early 1980s, that the Corps of Engineers was trying to figure out a way to more effectively enforce their policies having to do with access to and encroachments in federal channels. You don't have that situation here with the Federal Navigation Project. But at that time,
except in 5 Mile River.
Except in the 5 Mile River, which is a separate special commission. So back in 1980, there was a fellow, he's retired now from the Corps. He had the idea that if there were municipal commissions that had responsibilities for dealing with these sorts of issues having to do with navigation channels and docks and so forth, perhaps the issues that they were grappling with then could be headed off ahead of time. And there was a guy, he actually became my good friend, even though he called me bad names all the time, Senator Gunther from Stratford. I don't know if any of you know of his history. He was the longest-serving legislator in the history of Connecticut. He passed away, well, within the last 10 years or so. But he was involved in almost all of the environmental regulations, or legislation that was developed by or passed by the state. So the guys from the Corps, they interacted with Senator Gunther, and then Gunther introduced the harbor management legislation, which was 1984. So that legislation authorized, and if you look at the legislative history, it's interesting. I won't go on too long, but which is the transcript of what the legislators said when they voted on the law, when they introduced it. And Doc Gunther's famous comment was, the purpose of this law is to get the bureaucrats in Hartford, the HELL, out of our business locally. And so clearly the intent of the law was to increase local authority relative to state authority. Understanding, though, that the state authority doesn't go away. I mean, you can't eliminate the legislation that created the state permit authority. So that was 1984, and that authorized municipalities to establish harbor management commissions by ordinance, and to have the powers that the state enabling legislation provided. In that regard, it's no different from, the commissions are no different from planning and zoning commissions or conservation commissions. They're all authorized by state enabling legislation. And the other thing that among other things in the Harbor Management Act, it made these governor-appointed harbor masters ex officio members of the Harbor Management Commission and responsible for conducting their duties consistent with the Harbor Management Plan. So they created that relationship with the harbor masters and the Harbor Management Commissions. And also it made specified that the governor has to appoint a harbor master in a town with a harbor management plan. The appointment has to come from a list of 3 names provided by the Harbor Management Commission. So that was the beginning of the act. And then, towns, along the coast developed the harbor management plans. And so if you don't mind, we do have, and I might also say that there's a volunteer group of harbor management commissions that called the Harbor Management Association, which meets on an informal basis and tries to deal with issues of common interest. And over the years, we've done a lot of good work. But this map shows the towns that have harbor management plans and harbor management commissions. So there's 25 plans now that have been, and the process of establishing the plan is that it has to be approved by the DEP. And now, the approval used to also have to come from the Connecticut Department of Transportation, but the Department of Transportation's Maritime Division was eliminated a few years ago and replaced by the Connecticut Port Authority. So now the Connecticut Port Authority has to approve harbor management plans. And when that took place, the oversight of the harbor masters went from the DOT's Maritime Division to the DEP. So the process of approval and adoption is that the state, the DEP, and the Port Authority have to approve a plan. It also is reviewed by the Corps of Engineers. The Corps of Engineers doesn't have an approval authority. And then to take effect, it has to be adopted by the local legislative body. So here it would be the representative town meeting, and in Norwalk it's the Common Council, and Stamford it was the Board of Representatives. So this map is simply to show that the towns where there are harbor management plans now. So in western Connecticut, between Greenwich and New Haven, Darien and Westport are the 2 towns that don't have harbor management plans or harbor management commissions. So that's the background. But there's always been a conflict between. I'm getting into my personal opinions a little bit, but a conflict between DEEP. Well, now it's DEEP. It was DEP, but now it's Energy and Environmental Protection, concerning the implementation of plans, and to the extent that recommendations by the Harbor Commission are influence DEEP's decisions. So all of the plans that have been prepared, as part of the implementation, they include an application review process or procedure, whereby the Commission reviews and comments on applications for DEEP permits and certificates. There's another part of the review too, which is the referral from the local land use agencies to the harbor commissions. That's specified in the statutes. But a part of the implementation has always been the Harbor Commission's review applications for deep permits and comment to deep. And now recently, you know, that deep itself has a pre-application process where an applicant for a permit it has to come to the Harbor Commission before submitting the application. But that over the years, the issue has been to what extent does the Harbor Management Commission's recommendations influence deep? And there's a statute, I'm not quick enough right now to remember the number of it, but there's a statute that talks about binding recommendations on a state official unless the state official shows cause otherwise. And that's the section of the statute that talks about the content of a harbor management plan. And so that statute has been subject to different interpretations. You know, to what extent is the Commission's recommendation binding? And so the town of Greenwich, its harbor management plan was approved in 2017, so 5 years ago. And again, pardon me for just talking here, but this is a significant thing that affects all of the harbor commissions. So that in the course of work on the Greenwich Harbor Management Plan, the chair of the Greenwich Commission was a retired attorney, very, very bright, and we negotiated with DEEP to clarify the meaning of the recommendation that's binding on DEEP. And the end result was that DEEP approved the Greenwich Harbor Management Plan with a policy that it is a recommendation of the Harbor Management Commission pursuant to the plan and supported by the policies of the plan that's binding on DEEP unless DEEP shows cause otherwise. That's different than as a recommendation of the plan itself that's spelled out ahead of time. That's what was approved by DEEP. And that was also approved subsequently in the West Haven Harbor Management Plan, which was a year or two after that.
Are these macro clauses, so that they're saying to the extent that we give some purchase to the local commission, their ruling would be binding, so they have to carve out, are you talking about moorings in particular?
I'm not talking about moorings. I'm not talking about moorings now with respect to the Harbor Master's authority.
Okay.
Although there are moorings are also that are for commercial purposes also require DEEP permits as well as permits from the Harbor Master.
But this is on a general level where the authority lies with the Harbor Commission versus where it lies with DEEP.
It's the relationship, I think, is better.
The big picture at this point.
DEEP still has the authority and can do what it has the ultimate decision-making authority. But the way it was worked out in the Greenwich Plan is that the recommendation of the Commission is binding unless DEEP shows cause otherwise. In other words, DEEP can still make its own decision, but it just has to explain itself. That was what we thought was logical and made sense, because a plan can't identify an answer to every problem. That you go to the document and say, oh, okay, here, that's what we do here.
What constitutes cause?
Well, that was another discussion, and we had the discussion with DEEP, and some people argue that it has to be cause that's verifiable in court, but then it was agreed that it just has to be a written explanation of why DEEP made its decision. I know that doesn't sound like much, and it probably isn't, but it clarified that the recommendation of the Harbor Commission has weight. But now that's subject, and we were talking about it earlier, that's all subject to upheaval. Because a few years ago in Greenwich, there was an application for a dock that was approved by DEEP, and the dock doesn't attach to the land. In order to not have to comply with the zoning regulations that say that a dock has to be an accessory use to another principal site use, this property wasn't big enough for another site use, so the dock just begins a little bit waterward of mean-high water in the marsh. The Harbor Commission did not make a recommendation on that, but instead asked DEEP, we can't make a recommendation until we understand what your policy is for approving docks that don't attach to the land. DEEP didn't respond. When the neighbor who was aggrieved or didn't like the dock appealed to the DEP commissioner, And one of the things the neighbor argued was that DEEP didn't respond to the Harbor Commission's comments. DEEP then said it didn't have to, because the plan didn't say anything about docks that don't attach to the land. And our feeling is that that's contrary to what DEEP approved in the harbor management plan. So anyway, the neighbor then took this decision by DEEP to the Superior Court. And Greenwich joined the case because it was concerned about a loss of municipal authority. The Superior Court judge, interestingly, ruled that the only recommendation that's binding on DEEP is a recommendation that's already spelled out in the harbor management plan. And that's contrary to what DEEP approved in the plan. But the judge also went further, saying that there's no authority for a harbor commission to even review an application that's submitted to DEEP. And that, of course, throws out major parts of all the harbor management plans. That decision was then appealed to the appellate court by the neighbor and the town of Greenwich interveners, however the term is, that the town of Greenwich joined the appeal. The appellate court decision was issued in October, which upheld the Superior Court decision, that to have influence with DEEP, the recommendation has to be spelled out in the plan ahead of time. Now, prior to the appellate court decision, I know you're smiling probably because I'm talking too much here, but prior to the appellate court decision, the Superior Court decision was applied against the Norwalk Harbor Commission, which has spent the last 7 years reviewing plans by the Department of Transportation to replace the railroad bridge over the Norwalk River, which is a tremendous plan. 7 years we've been working on that. And during the course of the public hearing, the Commission submitted to the DEEP public hearing, submitted its recommendations and findings. The hearing officer then responded by saying that those comments had no weight other than general public comments, and referenced the Superior Court judge's decision that in order for a recommendation of the Commission to have any weight, it had to be spelled out ahead of time in the plan. And the plan didn't say anything about how the railroad bridge should be rebuilt. However, the plan in Norwalk talks about protecting water quality and maintaining public safety and water-dependent uses and avoiding adverse impacts from construction projects, but that wasn't good enough. So anyway, the appellate court decision that came out in October upholding the Superior Court decision, and now the town of Greenwich has submitted a petition to the Connecticut Supreme Court to hear this matter. And DEEP, of course, has submitted a petition opposing that. And so it may be 2 or 3 months, we learn, before the Supreme Court decides whether to take this case, and it may not be likely that they do. And in the meantime, the other harbor commissions are talking with their state representatives about a possible legislative remedy to adjust, to amend the statute to reflect what DEEP itself had approved in the Greenwich Harbor Management Plan. So that throws up, a lot of stuff in the air. But the purpose all along was at the beginning was to increase local authority, and it has done that up to this point. And Southport Harbor was a good example of it. And Southport ran into the same, back in the 1980s, if you're familiar with the Southport Harbor, very small, was historic harbor. It was once one of the major ports in Connecticut, but then a recreational harbor since. And there's a federal anchorage and a federal channel in Southport Harbor. So at the same time that the Corps of Engineers identified the problems in Norwalk Harbor, they identified problems in Southport Harbor. And in that instance, it was the yacht club controlling moorings in the federal anchorage. And so the U.S. attorney took action against the yacht club. This went on for maybe 10 years of conflict to figure out how to resolve all this. And it ultimately was resolved to everybody's satisfaction, I believe. And what I won't go into all of it, but the federal anchorage was what's the term? It was eliminated by an act of Congress, which gave the yacht club the opportunity to apply for its own mooring field. Deauthorized is the term. To apply for its own mooring field for its members. And in exchange, the yacht club provides boating services to the public and serves as the manager of inspections and so forth, works for the Harbor Management Commission, and there's a memorandum between the yacht club and the town for doing that. And I remember when that plan was initially adopted, there were residents who thought it was going to ruin the harbor because people from all over the place would apply for mooring permits, and it would ruin the character of the harbor, and there wasn't enough places for access. But it never did that. There's a waiting list. When a mooring becomes available outside of the yacht club's anchorage area, the next person on the waiting list is assigned. And the moorings in Southport are managed as they are in Norwalk and Greenwich with an online system where the harbor master doesn't mail letters to people and make copies. The applications and the renewals are done online.
That's how they are here too.
Yeah, I didn't know that, but that was something that just recently was instituted in Southport, and Norwalk has been for a while.
What, like 6-7 years ago?
Maybe more.
But that's my. I don't know if this.
Jeff,
Sorry to go on.
Let me
so long.
ask you a question, because it's super interesting to hear that history. And it may be that many people are sort of saying, well, why don't we have a harbor management committee? And you've had kind of like some front row seats to some of the Darien history around that.
Mm-hmm.
Can you comment on kind of like what happened in the, what was it, 89 or whatever it was, that
Well, I don't want to.
where we
I'm not gonna-
turned at the 11th hour,
Yeah.
and we've steadfastly been kind of against it. It's sort of a third rail topic here in town.
It's interesting. Back then, it's one of the first times I got involved in aerial photography, when we were doing this work. And so I scanned a couple of the old slides. So this is from 1988, Scott's Cove and Ziegler's Cove and Great Island. And we had
There's a bunch of sailboats, Scott's Cove on the edge there? Yeah, look at that.
Relics.
Yeah.
That's sacred.
Warms my heart, I have to say.
That's Ziegler's Cove.
Yeah, Ziegler's Cove.
Yeah, Ziegler's Cove, sorry.
And I remember it,
What was that taken?
pardon me?
What was that picture taken?
Says
1988.
88.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes
And
sense.
then in my travels, if that's what you call it around, here's a winter shot from 3 years ago, Scott's Cove. Sort of interesting with the bluish and the ice that's there.
Right, so, and I have to confess, I've borrowed that a couple times for some of our like strategic plan and stuff. So.
Here's one from the winter of last year with the Darien. I just, when I
Oh, that's a great
do
one.
my,
That's from the winter, just recent?
yeah, no, this is 2021.
Wait, can you hold that up just a
Yeah,
minute?
no, I'm sorry.
That's a wonderful shot because it shows the channel and all. You've got
Yeah, I don't have a good one of the, the lower part of the Roten Harbor, but I can tell you my recollections of what took place then, and I hope anybody listening doesn't say I'm, speaking poorly of anybody, but I remember.
None of us were there, so we
Yeah.
can't rebut what you say.
Well, I remember that in the old town hall, there was a public meeting where the room was filled with residents who expressed opposition to the plan. And the opposition, and there was a lot of information, pamphlets and papers that were distributed around arguing that the plan was a state plan. And it wasn't a local plan, it was a state plan, and it would give the state more authority than they had, and then of course that would open everything up to people from outside the town, and it would destroy the character of the town. That was my impression at the time. And there was also, it's what it was. There was a fellow who was the caretaker of the Ziegler's Cove. You remember the fellow named Joe Leo?
Yes.
Well, I talked with him quite a bit, but he controlled the moorings in Ziegler's Cove.
That's why I only see sailboats in that picture.
But he
Some of the other ones.
he controlled the moorings, and I remember when the harbor master, and I believe her name was Henkel. Does that ring a bell?
Yeah.
No, I
Henkel.
remember.
And again, if I'm
Dave Deaver piping in.
and she was dedicated to trying to do a good job. And this is before the whole plan fell apart, but there was a discussion about managing moorings in a fair way. And people wanted, again, this is my recollection, and I remember sitting in the auditorium and people, really talking negatively about the commission and what was being done. But there was discussion about that the navigable waters are not private. They're not controlled by private entities. It's the public trust waters of the state of Connecticut. The state holds the waters and the underwater lands in trust for the general public, and that goes back to the King of England, assuming he owned everything. And so the discussion was about Ziegler's Cove, and people wanted to place their own moorings, lunch hooks in Ziegler's Cove. And they said they had a right to do it, and it wasn't the right of the property owner to say that they couldn't. And so someone placed a mooring in Ziegler's Cove on their own, and it was removed. And then, of course, that led to a big to-do. And then the argument came up, and this is how we got into the shellfish discussion about the rights of the owners of shellfish beds. And so the argument that Mr. Leo made was that there's a private shellfish bed in Ziegler's Cove, and no one can place a mooring on a private shellfish bed without the permission of the owner of that bed. And that led to, well, where is the bed? And the owner wouldn't provide the map, saying that they provided it to the town, and the town lost it, and so we don't have to provide it again. And that led to a meeting at the Bureau of Aquaculture at the time in Milford, with the people from the town and the shellfish bed owner. It's not, that ownership of that bed, there is one in there that's been passed on to subsequent owners. But there was a meeting in the Bureau of Aquaculture about this, and a discussion about where the map is and where the bed is. And then that led to the work. Did I bring that up here? Remember that second report we did for the town attorney, distinguishing between natural shellfish beds and private grounds. And but my recollection, again, it was that there was widespread concern. Oh, there was another issue that had to do with moorings. And the DEP, he later became commissioner. His name was a fellow named Art Rock, who I actually became friends with. He's retired up in Maine now. And whenever I talk with him about the way things are, he tells me that someone wrote a song about this stuff called "The Times They Are A-Changing," but that's another story. But Art was very forceful. And so he was looked at as sort of like the Darth Vader of the state, trying to tell Darien what to do. And he made comments about the fairness of managing moorings, and also that moorings placed in the public trust are not owned by the adjoining property owner. So they can't be sold when property is sold, that it's not right to sell the mooring or to gain value from the mooring as well, because that's gaining value off of state property. And so he made comments like that, and then those were reproduced in the public sentiment that this was a plan by the state of Connecticut to take over Darien's waters, and that's when the effort stopped. But the harbor management, the well-established plans and programs in other towns, 25 towns, and the town that's working on one now is New London, which I think you probably followed the issue with the Connecticut State Pier and the support for the wind industry and the impact of that. But the city of New London is pursuing that plan because they wish to increase their local authority having to do with matters affecting the New London harbor management area. And now this decision by the court throws all that into unknown territory.
So if you think of the towns that don't have harbor management plans, is it fair to say that there's maybe a common theme, which is they are kind of the smaller waterfronts with less commercial activity, no federal waterways, things like that.
Well, Southport is small, and the other, East Lyme, is relatively small. And most all of the towns have federal. It's interesting that Darien doesn't. But I bet if you went along the coast, just about every town in Connecticut has a federal navigation project. It dates back, maybe to the 1800s or early 1900s when the harbors were used more for commerce. But I don't know that. I mean, there's certainly similarities between Westport and Darien in terms of size. Interestingly, Westport is now promoting that they've received federal money to dredge the channel in the Saugatuck River. Another interesting story, but they have a harbor master, I know, but they've never had an interest in a harbor management plan. I don't know that. I think that pretty much all the towns have federal navigation projects, channels or anchorages designated in them.
Well, again, we do also though in the 5 mile, but that's away from us, just from how we split the commissions.
But the 5 Mile River Commission, well, is interesting because that's not a harbor management commission. That's a special act commission created by the Connecticut legislature with representatives from Darien and Norwalk on it. In fact, Norwalk is, the Harbor Commission in Norwalk is pursuing I think you call it an initiative or a fee that's similar to the 5 Mile River fee. And the 5 Mile River Commission, I believe, is the only commission in Connecticut, it's not a harbor management commission, but the only harbor where a fee is collected from the owners of boats at docks, not just moorings. So to get a harbor use permit in the 5 Mile River, even if your boat is at a dock, you have to pay that annual fee, which goes into a dedicated account. And so that's another thing. The fees that are collected, pursuant to that state statute, they can only be used for purposes of improving the harbor for the public and for expenses of the Harbor Commission and the harbor master. So Stamford, for example, they have a mooring permit fee, but they also have a fee that's assessed for barge deliveries, for the O&G and the scrap metal. So that's something that was worked out with the operators of those terminals based on the number of deliveries the previous year. So they pay a sum based on the previous year that goes into the harbor management fund in Stamford. Norwalk's fees are all related to the mooring permits, and it's felt that that's not completely fair to all the boaters, that the mooring permit holders are responsible for the fees that go into managing the harbor. And there's a number of things that the fees are used for, I could go into. But,
Jeff, can we focus in on the regime for moorings, like the concept of having a harbor management plan that manages moorings, some tussles that may come up with the state, ordinances, and what place they have local ordinances in those fights?
You asked me to look into that, and I haven't gotten an answer yet. I've called Deep, and people at Deep now they're working remotely, and it's sometimes difficult, but that's not an excuse. But with the harbor management plan, it's very clear that within the statutes that the harbor master has to conduct his or her duties consistent with the plan. So the plans then include the basic policy that every boat mooring has to have a permit. And in fact, that's in the statute. That with a harbor management plan, no mooring can be placed in the harbor without a permit from the harbor master. That doesn't apply here, though. So use the example of Southport. There are a set of, we call them rules and procedures, that have to do with the issuance of a mooring permit. And so the harbor management plan, that's adopted separately from the harbor management plan. That's like an implementing regulation. So the town code authorizes the Harbor Commission to adopt rules and procedures following a public hearing. The harbor management plan calls for rules and procedures to manage moorings that the harbor master follows. There's a lengthy document having to do with when you make an application and, you know, what the priority is and that if you want to look, if you went to the Town of Fairfield website, I mean the other towns too, but went to harbor management and you'd find that the mooring rules, which are updated. Interestingly, they've been updated 5 or 6 times to deal with different issues that come up.
What's the intersection though between, like John King is our harbor master and the chairs there, the difference between things that give him power under Harbor Management Commission? It sounds like that's his enabling legislation, if you will.
But the harbor masters, there's a separate, you know, the separate statutes. It's 15-1 to something else that talks about the authority of the harbor master. And there's a statute that talks about the authority to station all vessels. And that, before the harbor management plans were involved, that was the statute that was seen as authorizing the harbor masters to issue permits for moorings. Now, and that's fairly general. But the question is, without a harbor management plan, can a town establish rules that a state official has to comply with?
Quite mixed.
And I don't know the answer to that. I've left a message for 2 people.
That would give him authority.
Well, he has the authority, but can the town adopt the rules? You know, when an application has to be made and about the waiting list.
The town does have ordinances that do govern the mooring process. They're limited and make it difficult for me at times to do things that need to be done. It's something that needs to be looked at because I have run into situations and I've spoken with the powers that be in deep about certain situations that I've run into, and based on the way our ordinances are written, there are things I can do and there's things I cannot do.
Well, that's very interesting then. So that's an answer that the town can establish an ordinance that has to be followed by a state official.
That's the mix that's perplexing me.
One of the things that they did share with me, you were talking about Greenwich and how they have a harbor management plan. Before Greenwich had a harbor management plan, they had a set of ordinances that were blessed by the state. Am I right or wrong?
The selectmen have some sort of special power that goes back to special acts of the legislature, which gave the selectmen, again, a special act of the legislature. I think it was in the 1950s, there were 2. It gave the selectmen authority over navigable waters.
Is that just in Greenwich?
Just in Greenwich, yeah. So there was a special consideration in Greenwich that other towns don't have, that the selectmen have had authority that other towns don't.
Right. Okay. Thanks for adding that. I did not know that piece. They didn't share that with me.
Make the reference to that, but so it's.
But am I right then that it would be potentially problematic to assume that town ordinances could effectively empower a harbor master in a local environment?
Now, some of the other towns, there's more than just an ordinance. There's the actual rules and regulations that follow from the ordinance. So, like as I mentioned, Southport has rules and procedures that the ordinance authorizes the commission to prepare and adopt. The same as in Norwalk. So when those rules and procedures and regulations are changed in Norwalk and Southport, that doesn't involve a change in the ordinance. It involves the change in the rule that the Harbor Commission
But the linkage is an official harbor management plan?
Yes, there's an official plan.
And we don't have that linkage.
You don't have that.
So that's an interesting gap.
Yeah, so I'm interested in this, so I'll get an answer from, if you don't, I'm not interfering in your business or looking for
It's information,
just,
sure, yeah.
It's interesting. And now, of course, DEEP has lost a lot of its institutional knowledge with retirements last year. So they hired new people and they don't have the background. But anyway, we keep pushing on the best we can. But this law case affects everybody and how that plays out. But it doesn't affect the harbor master authority, and it doesn't affect the authority of the harbor management commissions to review land use proposals. So that's specifically mentioned in the harbor management statutes, that proposed projects that affect the harbor, the waterfront land on and or contiguous to the harbor, that are received by any planning and zoning commission have to be referred to the harbor management commission for review and comments. But that again, that doesn't apply here.
And we get that, not right, but opportunity afforded to us just by comedy and the people at CTD wanting local comment. But we really can't do anything but call them back and say, we don't like this for our own personal reasons, and they listen or don't listen.
Well, that's another role that DEEP has. And again, I'm talking, all this, but DEEP has its regulatory role where it issues permits and certificates for work in navigable water. But they also comment to land use decisions in the designated coastal area. And that's with respect to the consistency of a land use proposal or a development proposal with the Connecticut Coastal Management Act. So that's a different role for DEEP, and it's not a regulatory role. The comments are advisory. And a zoning board or planning commission could do something different, and then DEEP's only recourse would be to sue the planning board or the zoning commission. And recently, it's interesting that historically, DEEP emphasized with land use proposals. And of course, this is relevant to Stamford. You follow the big development in Stamford that affected the Yacht Haven West Boat Yard. Historically, DEEP was emphasized the impact of land use and development proposals on water-dependent uses, because that's a priority in the Coastal Management Act. Now the additional emphasis is on floodplain development and flooding and sea level rise and resiliency. So recently, DEEP, this wouldn't apply in Darien because of the zoning, but DEEP has made very forceful comments regarding projects in Stamford and Stratford and New Haven, where there's pressure for redevelopment of the waterfront with multifamily residential development. And DEEP's position now is that proposals that would increase residential density in the coastal floodplain are inconsistent with the Coastal Management Act. But if the land use board does something different, DEEP's only remedy would be to bring suit against them. But that's another element of DEEP's comments now, in addition to impacts on water-dependent uses.
But they just comment, and their only recourse is lawsuit. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. So it's an advisory, in that regard, with the Coastal Management Act and land use proposals, it's an advisory review or advisory comments.
Does that mean their position on when they give a permit for a dock, their authority is weaker than it appears? I mean, they seem to be able to do anything they want.
That's a different authority.
That's a different process.
That's the permit process, and that concerns doing anything in waterward of the coastal jurisdiction line is what they're talking about now, which is actually a little bit inland from the mean high water line. So within that jurisdiction, they have regulatory authority.
Okay, so that's
Yes.
more than just review and open pursuits.
And now it's interesting. Again, I'll see. Am I going past the time?
We're good about the time. Yeah, this is wrap up. Any other questions?
There's another interesting thing that's happening now, and it's that proponents of docks are arguing that for I think, additional consideration than historically. Traditionally, DEEP has taken the position that the property owner has a right of reasonable access to navigable water. That doesn't mean, that the property owner can have a dock to accommodate whatever size boat that property owner has, or just that. But recent applications where attorneys are arguing that the property owner has a right of 24-hour access to navigable water. And if the water is shallow, then it has a right to dredge. And that affects the whole permit program. And I know Deep was thinking that this is another approach that's probably leading to some sort of court challenge. And we see this in Norwalk and in other places, where a new property owner has a bigger boat. The dock was suitable for the previous property owner, it's not now. And as a result, that property owner should have a right to dredge, to get out to deeper water. And that's not been something that Deep has supported in the past. The incremental impacts or cumulative impacts of that sort of dredging, would be significant on shellfish beds. But that's another.
Have you seen a fight over just dock sizes? So in Darien, we've seen increasingly long docks. I mean, there's the normal 440 rule, and everything seems to be an exception to the 440 rule, and quite long. I mean, is that in the jurisdictions you're working with? Is that
sure? That's the issue I'm just mentioned now, about building either longer docks to have access to deeper water, or dredging from the existing dock to get out to deeper water.
Does the mechanism of the official harbor management commission seem to, besides this recent court case challenging it, seem to offer levers that the local authorities can use to fight back at that?
Well, when the commissions have reviewed proposals like that, of course they look at the existing conditions in the docks that are nearby, and would argue that extending past the existing extension of docks nearby creates an invitation for the other docks to go out. So it's looking, and also another aspect is working with the shellfish commissions to try to avoid new dredging and dredging that would disturb natural shellfish beds. And Deep has said, well, if you don't want to dock in a certain place, you should say that in the harbor management plan, and then we'd be bound by that. But I don't think that that's an appropriate way of saying to a property owner, you can't do anything here. Although the borough of Fenwick has done that. Do you know where that is on the mouth of the Connecticut River? Catherine Hepburn lived there. And in Old Saybrook. And the shoreline is a portion of the shoreline that's never had a dock before. It's all the natural shoreline. And some years ago, there was a property owner who wanted to build a dock there. And the town, the borough of Fenwick, modified the harbor management plan to identify that area as an area where there would be no permanent structures, and that access would not be through, and the property owner never challenged it, and Deep was bound by that. But that's an odd case, and the way the plans, like the Greenwich plan, it identified a number of conditions that should be considered when the Harbor Commission looks at a proposal for a dock. And that talks about the presence of sensitive coastal resources and the extent of docks nearby, and comments from the Shellfish Commission. And another thing that comes up often is the relationship of a proposed dock to the littoral property line, the extension of the owner's essentially littoral area to do stuff in navigable water. And you often see drawings that are submitted that don't show the extended property line, and if they did it, the proposed dock would intersect with it. So that's an example of just looking at a plan to saying it's not complete without that property line. And then the Corps of Engineers has guidelines for setbacks from those property lines, which can't be met in every instance when the properties are narrow. And in some instances, recently in Greenwich, where a dock was unavoidably close to the property line, we asked that Deep take the Harbor Commission asked that Deep take no action until the adjoining property owner has an opportunity to comment in the pre-application phase as to whether they were going to object or not. So those are all case-by-case decisions that are made without going into a book and having an answer whether you can do this or you can't. But that's
interesting stuff. Did you have any other questions for Jeff? I mean, we can gain access to him on other occasions. I think as you can see, he knows a lot about the topics that we're wrestling with here that are complex.
I have a question for you. As rivers coming down silt in, the low mean tide line is actually going to rise because of the silting in. Is there an appetite for being able to dredge that out again, or does that necessarily, does the rule change and the mean low tide change and become permanent?
Well, it depends, you know, of course, with a designated channel that silts in like that, and it has an authorized depth, then that's a different case than a natural condition where there's no authorized channel. Where deep is pretty much always been adamant that you know, that they don't want to approve new dredging. Now that's in conflict with what I just said about property owners wanting to dredge to have deeper, you know, have access.
Right.
But I would think that, you know, I would say that in a natural condition, there's no, you shouldn't think that deep is going to agree to dredge out the increased sediment siltation that occurs. But with a designated federal channel, of course, that's part of the maintenance of the channel.
Right.
But if a private owner has a dock and over the years that dock has silted in or not, are you generally allowed?
If there isn't, if this has come up came up in Southport, another example. But if it's new dredging, no, but if the owner has a permit, had a previous permit, and
If it had been dredged previously.
had dredged in the past, and can say something was maintained regularly.
Yeah.
But if you don't have the permit, then deep is not. And interestingly, deep doesn't treat residential docks as water-dependent uses under the coastal. The residential dock is a water-dependent use as they do with marinas and clubs and terminals and so forth. And that's something that I think that they're anticipating may be challenged, and has been by a couple of these projects that I mentioned, where the property owner is arguing I should have a right to dredge because it's a water-dependent use. But it's not been considered that under the Coastal Management Act. But the consideration is whether there was historically a permit to dredge, and whether it has been dredged in the past. But new dredging is something that DEEP has been opposed to. You sound like a know-it-all, but
Thank you.
Jeff, thanks.
Thanks very much.
thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to learn new stuff.
We'll talk to you again. Thanks for bringing those. Those were fantastic.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. Again.
That's right.
You know, the resolution is not the same, of course, as with the digital camera now. And so this was a slide that I scanned recently to do this. But the colors from the old slide film are better oftentimes than from the digital camera. And a guy explained this to me why, and it was too complicated for me to understand. But the colors are truer than with the digital
And
camera.
that's the Paul Simon song, right? Kodachrome.
Kodachrome.
It's like no moorings in there. There's like 12 moorings.
That was, back during that period of time, it was heavily regulated by the family.
Yes, that was Mr. Leo's
Yeah, that was
responsibility.
Mr. Leo's job. He was the appointed harbor master for Ziegler's Cove. And the story you're talking about, moorings being removed, there was more than one over the years.
So
The boats that were all in there were all people that were friends of the family that were granted access from Great Island to be able to go out to their boats.
did it fill up with boats on hook?
Well, they have a little dock there. You have your dinghy, and you'd be able to go out to your boat in the morning if you were friendly with the Ziegler family.
But like, so that was late 80s, was it? 86 or so? Were
He said 88.
people using it as a day stop? I mean, when I came to town, 93 or 94.
No, that was a berthing harbor.
Oh, really?
That's where people kept their boats.
Yeah, okay. So when did it switch over to, just total day use?
Probably around the time he said it was challenged and people, it was Connecticut waters, not private waters, and that probably run into it.
Yeah.
At what time, I'm not really sure.
I think I remember it was being used, day hooks, like 95 on when I started boating, but it wasn't very crowded. Then it became ridiculous to drive fast. Great, thanks.
Good luck with everything.
Thanks.
Good shots.
That was awesome.
Yeah, he knows his stuff. He's been involved in a lot of harbor management.
I'll leave this open a little bit. Just
Yeah,
because
I'm
of
gonna
the
vary
noise.
a little bit, because
He's been involved in a lot of harbor management commissions through the years, and I met him when he was sort of on, it seemed like almost a permanent staff of Stanford's management commission, and would attend most of the meetings and give advice like you just heard. It's complicated though, isn't it, the legal wranglings?
And
It can make your head swim a bit.
Yeah. and everybody's gonna challenge it.
Sounds like there, yeah, some changes in there.
Let other towns be on the bleeding edge of all this litigation until it gets worked out one way or the other.
Sounds like that could put everything
Yeah.
Up in the air.
to null, right? I mean, it sounds like it could void everything, right?
It's like we were ahead of it. Not doing it.
20 years before our time, yeah.
Ah,
Well, should we look at our regular programming? So we've got the minutes from September 12th meeting. Thanks, Tom. I forgot who took the notes. Was that you, David?
It was.
Yeah, thank you both. Can I have a motion and a movement to approve?
the only thing I noticed is my first name's not spelled correctly.
Apologies. Sorry.
Jeez.
Wow. So we'll correct that. And other than that, how are folks on this? Motion to approve? And all approve? All approve?
yes.
With that correction of Lori's name? Sorry. Okay, I guess we'll launch into Chairman's report. And John, I just put a placeholder for you, Harbor Master update. If you'd like to give us some
Sure.
report, that'd just be great. I won't be too long here on my stuff. We're at 8:30. So there was a new dock application that came in, 10 Pratt Island. Did people have a chance to take a look at that?
Yeah.
Got a copy of it if anyone wants to see it right here and now. I can pass around.
Is that in front of, I'm having trouble citing it from the picture. Is that in front of the new house?
Yes.
Is it the new? So it is the new
Yeah,
house.
it's just south of the gazebo.
So, we don't know what to do with these, but I, did notice that this one was 181 feet long. If you take the 440 rule, you're meant to go, that would limit you to the greater distance of 40 feet from high water or a depth of 4 feet below mean low. So basically, 40-ish feet governs. All the docks are pretty small, like the old docks you see in Goodwise River. And this one's, out 180 feet. One can have some sympathy when you look at the pictures. It's, rock, right? And so you're not going to have a very good place to launch a boat. But here we are with our shores getting, nearly 200-foot docks stacked up against them. So this is another one in point, I think, that the coastline's changing. We don't really have much authority to stop, it seems.
Extend out in the north view? Yeah.
So it's pointing directly south.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's what was confusing me by the picture.
It's pointing directly south towards that pile of rocks that's off of Pratt Island.
I don't think there are any moorings because
Well,
even though
western.
it's 180 feet long or whatever it is, a lot of that is stuff you would consider the shoreline still.
It's very shallow.
Depends what the-
Well, it's going out far enough that the engineer, contractor, or whoever was filling out the application contacted me because they wanted to move one of the moorings in order to accommodate the pier going out. And it turned out that the mooring that they wanted to move was the mooring of the person who previously owned the property and was relocating, is going to be relocating his boat to the other side of the harbor. So that issue sort of resolved itself.
But we net lose one mooring in the harbor. Sort of.
In that area, yes.
And why is that person entitled to that mooring even though it's in front of their house?
Well, putting aside whether they're entitled or not, that just was their mooring.
And now they have
previous
docks instead.
The previous owner just had a mooring out in front of their home. They've since sold the property. Now the new owner wants to put a pier out there, and in order to do that, the mooring that used to be the previous owners, which is really going to be relocated to the other side of the harbor, and he's already been permitted for it before my time.
Isn't the
Because
point
this is
though,
gonna unfold.
that a mooring is a mooring is a mooring, it doesn't matter
It doesn't
whose
go
boat
in
is
the
on
house.
there? I
Yeah, that's right.
Right.
That's
Yeah,
what we were
just
saying.
Okay.
The other exception to the rule on, well, it's not an exception to the rule, but the other thing one could notice in contrast to the shorter general dock rules of, longer 40 feet or 4-foot depth, that limits the dock size to 10 feet by 10 feet, and this is 8 by 20. So, everything just seems to get maxed out. And the other thing I'd point out about this, I agree, it wouldn't be a very usable dock unless you cleared those rocks. But it's not going to be a very usable dock with that southwest exposure anyway.
That's a super rough area.
Super rough.
Well, isn't that house points west, not south, with the docks going south?
Unless I'm mistaken, I'm pretty sure it's pointing south.
Do you have the blueprint there?
I do, yeah.
I think you're right. I think it sort of has more of like.
Oh, sorry, yes, east,
Pointing
not,
east,
but
yeah.
east, not, but not south.
That's why I was so
Kind of
confused about.
south, is this sort of south, that, you're seeing where the house is facing.
Yeah, the property lines go run mainly east, maybe slightly to the south, but not due south.
Yeah,
Not
no.
towards those rocks.
No, the house face is kind of east, so maybe a little.
Yeah, it'll be a little southeast, actually. Here's a site map or stuff.
So that's what it said, no, this is the view that's gonna be
Yeah.
like east Big Azale, and I was just very confused, but that's why I was thinking it was going out in the center of the harbor, you're saying it's going due south.
Pretty much south.
What does this show on the site map in terms of the house's orientation?
It sort of runs in parallel with the west wall of it.
John, if you had gone to the state and said, hey, we really want to keep that mooring there, who would have won out? You or the state now? Because they rubber stamp those damn things, those.
Unless they're your application, in which case they'll never approve.
Like I said, seeing that the situation seemed to be resolving itself.
Yeah, no, I think you did the right
I don't
thing.
think that I would have much to stand on.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I think the question would also be, who would want that mooring out there? Aside from the owner who had it in front of his house.
Well, the owner now is is building a house on the other side of the harbor, and he wants his mooring over there.
Right. But as I said, we're losing a mooring to the south of the property, but who else besides the person owning that property would want that mooring?
Anybody
But-
who belongs to the boat club or the yacht club who.
No, but put it another way, that's not a
That's-
very prime location.
no,
There are
it is
other
a
empty
terrible
spots
location,
to
yeah.
put moorings over
Yeah,
there
I guess that's my
that don't have moorings in it, because of,
It's kind of a minefield.
it's
over
kind of
there.
a total. It's far and it's pretty
Good for a
close.
road.
I think they move too.
It'd be a long,
I think those rocks move in the middle of the winter sometimes.
By the way, I wanted to.
Where is their channel?
This is the compasser, so straight up this way. So,
This is
like your
the
boat
harbor.
is over
Okay, so
here.
this is the harbor,
Right.
Yeah.
okay. Oh, it's way over here, this is the coast?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I was thinking it was like coming out this way. I was just having a lot of trouble reading.
It sort of like runs the same direction as Smith's Reef, like
Maybe I'm not thinking right now.
It's,
maybe 20 degrees off.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's like 20.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's not projecting out into the bulk of the moorings that are
Okay.
over there.
Yeah, it's not
It's
now
all
a full waterway.
that it's on too. I mean,
Yeah,
you're
it's,
not getting into a boat traffic area.
it's hard to keep permanent, I would think they're gonna have a hard time keeping a permanent float on that dock if that's what their intention is.
Have you been over, anyone been over to see the dock that is in,
Andres Halverson, and
behind Fish Island, is that what it is?
Yeah.
Well, that's got kind of like a
Yeah, that's
winch that
pretty
pulls it up out of the water.
It's got 4,
Okay.
Yeah.
so for equal points, but on pilings that it comes out of the water.
yeah, it's sort of like the float out at Sheffield Island. I mean, that, Green's
That just
Ledge-
moves the gangway,
Green's
the dock
Ledge.
stays in the water.
What?
That, at Green's Ledge, the dock stays in the water, the gangway just comes up.
Oh, I thought they pulled the float up.
No, just the gangway.
Well, it's the same idea, which is how do you deal with
Yeah,
like huge wave action?
interesting to see.
But it's
That's
all
a nice
fun.
technology.
They approve them, we have no say.
That's where we stand here.
We just get aggravated about it. We can't do a thing.
You know, on any given one, again, you're like, except for the Goodwise River one, which is just so blatant, but on any given one like this, you can say, okay, there's a lot of territory there, but it's the multiplication of all these. Our whole coastline seems to be piling up with sticks coming out of it.
But that is the general implication of their policy, which is, you know, coastal owners, I mean, you heard like presumptive right of reasonable access to the water.
All right.
So, you know, you kind of get a dock unless there's some big issue there.
No, the question is just the size of the dock, right?
Yeah.
We're not arguing.
Yeah. No, the size of the dock to me is the thing. When you look at the general permit, I sort of view in my own, you know, simpleton's view of it, that everything should be a 440 permit, you know, the lesser distance of 40 feet or the 4 feet of water. And because that preserves a nice looking coastline. And it sort of would be, why would we give you an exception? But it seems like everything is an exception now. So, because I would assume landowners pocketbook. They can do this, it's their lot, they can do it financially, and so they do it. It's sort of a requirement of building out your property to highest value. A little bit frustrating from the coastal aesthetic side. You know. Well, just brought that up to frustrate people, sorry.
Yeah, but I mean, I just question as an advisory commission, what are we supposed to do? We've seen by experience that what Deep wants to approve, Deep gets.
Well, I think Flip is on to, at the moment, the only thing I can see we may have traction on, and that is to talk with the Planning and Zoning Committee here about not allowing repeat cases of the 200-foot Goodwise River dock because there's multiple lots behind the waterfront. That seems to be the only thing perhaps we can get some traction on at the moment.
Yeah, just because that is sort of a P and Z thing,
Right.
unlike most
No,
of these docks.
I get it.
And that could be a really effective strategy as people subdivide going forward, families and kids and things like that. So I think that's valuable, but other than that, it sounds like a very frustrating topic no matter where you are at this point, given the court case.
So for example, with this one at 10 Brad Island, it's kind of for our information, but we're not going to take any action on that. I mean, I'm not recommending we do, I don't know what we can do.
So can we make a statement for someone else's information, since this is just for our information?
Well, what I could do, like with the one at Goodwise River, we ran it up the flagpole. We told the first selectman that we objected to this. We told them we wanted to write a letter to Deep. We had some strong reasons. I don't know if we can muster the same reasons for this dock, but we could point out ones that look, that they're pushing the limits to us, that they're not that useful a dock, and yet the person's still putting in a 200-foot dock. Maybe we just should be pointing these out to the first selectman, board of selectmen. I mean, do you think that's a good strategy on this?
I think if we're going to do that, we need to make sure we actually are educated about all this stuff and not just, because, for instance, how deep is it at the end of that dock?
Yeah, I don't know.
So if it's 4 feet deep, it's exactly in compliance with what,
No, it's meant to be the lesser of 40 feet from mean high water or 4 feet deep. So this would be,
but that would mean you can't have a dock here.
yeah, it
Which
would.
that-
Well, or you could have a dock, but it ends on rock in low tide.
Right.
Which would be-
So, but I mean, I'm not against like complaining about things that don't make sense, but we really need to make sure that we're comfortable it doesn't make sense
Yeah.
before we take a stand on that, I think.
And to have some consistency in our views. And unfortunately, I think we're all really behind the 8 ball here because we're not land use attorneys, or in this case, water word attorneys, right? So there's a real specialty here. And the terminology quickly gets over our head. I find it pretty frustrating. I think also, even if we were technically proficient here, well, I guess he said there's a lot of customized permit approvals, but still, it seemed to me you'd have to have some central plan about how you're going at things. Like for a river where things are close, we never allow anything but a 440 permit.
Their policy.
A policy, yeah. And that, I'm not sure, I'm not hearing him, Jeff Stedman, say other towns have done this, although I did hear that the Black Rock area had a ban on permits for docks.
I think he said the opposite, right?
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
he said the opposite, like it's not a positive way to say no docks at all, right?
Right.
No X,
Right.
Whatever the one may be, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but
Catherine
except for the
Hepburn-
Fenwick,
Catherine Hepburn, yeah.
except for the Fenwick area, which has a historical precedence, I guess, of there not being it, and they want to preserve that. Which,
Yeah.
But maybe that's the thing, to look at what historically has been precedent in Darien, to get inventory of what's out there, and then sort of build a policy off of that. If they decide whether they want to deviate from it, if these huge docks are offered up, then you say, well, this hasn't been done before, now we're deviating. And that's sort of how I think you would come at it.
I tend to think it's an uphill battle, not to be a downer on it, but I tend to think in a town which wants to allow people to enhance their properties as they see fit, this is going to be an uphill struggle, especially when we're not citing other towns with strong examples of how to regulate this.
We're an advisory commission to the Board of Selectmen. What do the Board of Selectmen want from this commission? Do they want us to just look and say, well, that's
There's
nice,
another one.
go on to the next one? Or do they want us to actually opine as people who are on the water and have an opinion of, what is appropriate for this coastline? I don't know the answer to that question.
I think we did so well on the 200-foot Goodwives dock. As frustrating as that was, I think we lodged our opinion and they heard it. And the question on something like this is maybe less clear, and I think Flip's got a
Well, we
point.
have a new new first selectman,
Yeah.
a relatively new. Should we hear from her, what do you want from us?
Yeah. My sense is they were learning about it live time with us on that last one, that they don't have a firm view, and that maybe it would take multiple cases for us to start to congeal a firm view in their viewpoint. But we could continue the conversation on this one.
But I mean, I think that's a really good question, because at the end of the day, what the selectmen have some sway over the zoning commission, am I correct? The zoning commission already,
But the zoning commission has no regulatory authority over these docks. That's the problem.
I mean, have they, I thought on the last one, the Goodwives one, the zoning commission took some action. They saw that application
Yeah,
before.
they negotiated on our behalf on that one.
Yeah, but that was, in a sense, a slightly different situation, which is they allowed this, what I'll call shorefront condominium
Yeah, yeah.
of joint ownership of 4 houses and like one little non-buildable strip of land. That zoning allowed that. And then they allowed what I view as the false storyline of, well, you've got 4 houses with waterfront, so they should have be able to have
Right.
4 docks.
Yeah.
And because we're only coming with a plan for 1, we should be able to get a turbocharged supersized
One
dock.
that's 4 times as big.
Yeah, which, that to me is not the way you should look at it. But that had more involvement in P and Z because it involved the land.
All of those exceptions on the land side.
Yeah.
But for example, this one on Pratt Island, has P and Z seen this application already? I don't know how it works.
Probably, I think they would have.
We're not 100% sure. CTD suggests to the owner and owner's engineer, they send us something somewhere in the process, which is before its submission to P&Z for approval. I'm just not sure if that'd be before Jeremy's receipt of this. Do we get it at the same time or not? I don't know.
I'm just saying all this just for a plan for us going forward, okay?
Yeah.
I mean, if, what we're seeing is that DEEP has an appetite to grant exceptions. They're doing it here. This is not 440. They did it at Good Wives River. What does the town want from us?
But I think Flip's saying,
But is everybody clear that the next house over has a similar sized dock already? And has had for like 10 years.
and that was what our guest speaker said too when he was talking about Greenwich, right? He said when dock applications come in, that's one of the things that's taken into account is the landscape of other docks in the area, right? Because if all the piers are, let's say, 100 feet, right, then the precedence is sort of set. If they're 100 feet to get out to that water, it'd be functional, right? You don't want to put a 200-foot one in, but it kind of fits the landscape. Seems like that kind of fits the landscape.
Yeah, I mean, for DEEP, this already approved that dock up on Good Wives River for the Parachute Point property, which is going to stick way out into the river. And, you know, it's not 440, there's nothing 440 about that. And they seem to approve that without even thinking about it.
But I think the Board of Selectmen doesn't have the base of knowledge that this committee probably has. And they're not gonna know, maybe they know what they're asking for, maybe they don't know what they're asking for because they're not even aware of the level of issues involved. And, I mean, probably most of us didn't know what Jeff was talking about or had. So if we don't build the knowledge from here and then push it upwards, there is gonna be no knowledge base related to this.
Well, why don't I suggest I do another review of the issue with Monica and Wayne Fox. They were both involved in the 200-foot one in Good Wives, and so was Jeremy. They heard me on 2 occasions. They heard us on 2 occasions. I was putting forward the letter that we all had agreed to. And why don't I tell them, you know, we don't necessarily have a solid view on this one like we did on the 200-foot one, other than this is the concern, the multiplication of these. And let me see if I can get more direction about how we might proceed.
Yeah, what would they like us to do? I think your point is
Yes.
fine. Because if they don't really want us to be doing something, I just wonder if it's a waste of our time
Totally.
talking about it.
I also don't know that I'm comfortable saying that I'm going to stand against this person at 10 Pratt Island or be a voice against this person at 10 Pratt Island.
But you were on the 200-foot one, I noticed. I knew your view prior to that, but when the 200-foot one came, you voiced some objection, but you said, basically, I'm in between, but I'm going against this
Yeah,
one.
yeah.
So there's some limit
That one was
Yeah.
a little different, right? And I think
Yeah, it's a
that
little
I
in your
respect
face
that,
as
but-
you're driving down there, like this one is way south. I mean, nobody's hardly even gonna see it,
I think
except if
there's
you're out on the water.
totally, and I think there are some aspects of that we talked about too, right? Not necessarily a private homeowner looking to exercise their right, but like a development that's not really set, I think, right? But this is a private homeowner trying to do his thing. He wants a dock. I don't know.
Yeah, that's
I sort of have a
100%.
hard time saying that I don't agree with that. If I had that piece of property and the means to do it, I think I would want a dock. I mean,
I think we all would. We'd
There's
say
some-
what maximizes
Yeah,
the
there's
property's
some-
value and what's my neighbor done, right?
sure,
So-
there are some days that the dock is not useful and not enjoyable, but there's a lot of days when it's very enjoyable and very useful. And if you have it and you want it, that's kind of your right.
Can we switch off this because we're at 10 of 9? I definitely want to let John Kina speak for a bit. I just have a couple more things.
If I would add One thing, especially if they're kind of consuming a mooring spot by putting this dock there, I would suggest maybe you consider not giving them a presumptive mooring also in addition to the dock, if you can help that.
Well, I already, in the conversation I had at the time, I also informed the engineer, contract, whatever it was. I wanted a copy of the registration of the boat that he intended on putting there. Because if it's gonna be an empty mooring, there's not a place for that. So I've already asked for that
You're
and
talking
not heard
about the
anything.
mooring going over to the east side.
No, that one is already
Okay.
at that. But if he's going to, and I believe I remember, if I remember the conversation correctly, he was gonna want a mooring also. He said, well, I'm gonna need a copy of a registration for a boat, because I'm not gonna permit an empty mooring. And I have not heard anything since then.
My quick couple items, I'll just run them through quickly, and then John, we'll get to you. Got a UWS update and water, unified water study, water quality things. So the grades came out, they will come out officially on Thursday. We got a sneak preview today. The grades for the water quality in Darien Harbor under that study anyway, and we get from a B+ to an A-, so basically it's about the same. I think our water clarity levels were higher than before. We had a couple of bad years that way, at least one very bad year that way. So that was nice to hear. Holly Pond got a B-, I think it was better than the year before, sorry Bill. Stanford got an A-. Anyway, we've had a not the best water quality sampling season. We lost a boat driver. He moved to Hartford. Gary Banks, if you knew him, he had done great work for several years on the study. And then and that was midsummer. And then our two sondes. Well, we had one sonde that broke, then we got another sonde, and it broke, and they didn't replace it. So we didn't have any sampling equipment for September and October. Yeah, so that was irritating. The program's grown big, and they've been stretched on equipment and people, and I think that was the reason for that. So unfortunately, we had sort of a half season, which I think qualifies us still to get in their books, but that was, I think, awfully disappointing. And then just the last word on our 2023 logistics. So I sent everybody a meeting schedule for the year. You saw that? We're locked into our rooms, this room, and I picked the second week in each month, I think this is the second Wednesday in each month. And so we're all scheduled up for the first meeting on February 13th, Monday again, 7:30. I'm pushing the two nominating committees, the Republican and Democratic, to give us some more candidates. A couple of you put forward people to pursue, and we are pursuing them as candidates here. So that's nice, but we still have 3 open slots, and we can't fill them all, and we still need officers. So I've had some good conversations with some of you on that score. So we're making some progress, but we still need more bodies on both the officer level and just to filling up the slot. So hopefully the nominating committees come through with more people by the time we reconvene. So we'll talk all more about that then. But I think we're functioning as a nice discussion point, so we'll just keep going, even if we don't have the officers at the moment, nor the full bodies for all the seats. So I think there's something viable. We just keep working at it. And I think that's it for me, although maybe I just throw in something on the shellfish bed closure just to make this...
Now that the water quality is much better.
So, yeah, everything's fine. So I just thought I would read an email to David Knopf, the Health Department Director, from the Supervising Environmental Analyst at Aquaculture, with regard to our closed beds, which are of significant concern to all of us. And I think this will give you a feel for the bureaucratic nature of the problem we're in. So just bear with me for a moment. In response to David's request to, hey, when are we going to be cleared for shellfishing again, she says, we are still struggling to catch up on our reporting requirements. However, we are very close to finalizing reports. We will need to produce a new MOU for the areas, which can take some time. The FDA, which regulates this area and caused the shutdown, has informed me that as long as there is a draft report, we are clear to open an area. I am somewhat concerned about the portion of the MOU under the city of Norwalk, because Norwalk's purview, we had to create a bigger closure, and that's new for the system, and this could hold up the process because there's a lot of players over there. Now, I'm not quite sure why that should link to us, but here's the point, that it's a big, complicated affair. Additionally, we will need to create a new classification description and produce public notice with the changes, which adds time to the process. Darien is first on that list, despite the thing about ties to Norwalk and the slowdown. My hope is to have all the classification changes completed by the end of November. In the past, we've tended to enact the changes for the first of the year. It's just easier for data analysis and management that way. Considering the length of the closure, we should be open to enacting the change sooner than January 1, 2023, but it will depend on how long it takes to complete the entire process. So I think you can feel that last word is the process, is the thing we're under here, and it's sort of a bureaucratic thing. I think, you read something like that, and I'm not having a lot of concern, especially since no one's clamming now, about the quality and safety of the clams. It's more about the quality of the process.
It's amazing that anything gets done in this country at all. I mean, it's just unbelievable.
But it does sound like it should be up and running for next
For
spring.
next spring, yeah. And David Knopf's been good at sending off that email and keeping Monica and myself in the loop, so
Nice.
yeah, hope to have some good news on
Oh,
that.
my
We're just glad our diet
There's
doesn't.
gonna be some jumbo plans next year.
We'd all be dead.
They're just growing and growing.
So John, it's a couple of minutes before 9, but talk to us as long as you'd like. We're here.
Okay. No, I'll just start off with just a couple of statistics. According to the system that I use, we have 277 approved moorings in Darien. We have 220 people on the wait list, and that speaks to people, not to the actual number of people who are waitlisting possibly for more than one mooring. That number is more like 290, and I'll get into that a little bit more. I really only had time this year to focus on Darien Harbor. I did not have time to get over to Norotan Bay, lightly skimmed over Ziegler's Cove and Scott's Cove. I did a tour of all the harbors, but my main focus was Darien Harbor. Part of the problem that I'm running into is the last time that these buoys were stickered was in 2016. So wind, sun, and weather has taken its toll on the stickers, so none of them are legible anymore. As I said to some of you before, in 2016 I was actually part of that stickering project in conjunction with my son. Some of the boats do look familiar to me in the harbor going back that far. Being on the water in Darien for many years now, I've seen a fair amount of turnover. I have established that there's probably somewhere in the neighborhood of about 20 moorings that are going to be freed up for next season. They're either no longer in use, they've been abandoned, people have moved out of town. So 20 is a number I'm comfortable with right now. It could be more than that, and I'm just talking about Darien Harbor also. I re-stickered approximately 75 moorings in Darien Harbor this year. One of the things I touched on briefly was the ordinances need to be updated. The ordinances were written for a time when Darien Harbor was much different. There never was an extensive wait list. There never was a problem finding a place to put another mooring, but those days are gone. One of the changes I'll be implementing for next year is everyone who's either going to be on the wait list or going to be permitted for a mooring is going to have to provide me with a Connecticut registration. There are a number of boats that I found in the harbor that were not registered in another state, only documented. Connecticut statutes require any boat that is in Connecticut waters for 61 days out of or more in a calendar year has to be registered in the state of Connecticut. You don't have to live here. In fact, we do, if you, sure as you know, there's probably members of Norotan Yacht Club that don't live in another state, keep their boat here, but they need to be registered in Connecticut if they're going to be, you know, on a mooring in Connecticut waters for 61 days or more. Just a couple other things. Rock buoy at the end of Long Neck Point washed away. I don't know where it went. It's going to have to be replaced. There's always been 2 5-mile-an-hour buoys over at Fish Island. The one that was to the west disappeared a couple of years ago. I've since had that replaced. One of the things I'm going to talk to the state about, and I know Tom Bell told me he looked into it, but didn't have the chance to. A 5-mile-an-hour buoy out in front of Ziegler's Cove. I'm sure as anybody knows what Ziegler's Cove is like on the weekend. People whizzing by, and it's so busy in there. People are anchored out on their own anchors far outside the cove now, and people just whiz through there like they don't understand it. It's, you know, people are at mooring.
Where's your placement of that? What are you thinking about?
Well, that's a good question. It's my understanding the state, I have to talk to them about doing it. I'm open to recommendation. I was thinking somewhere around the, similar to Scott's Cove, sort of like the entrance area to Scott's. There's a 5-mile-an-hour buoy, something along those lines too, where, just outside where the first moorings begin in that neighborhood. Put a 5-mile-an-hour buoy there.
As you come in and kind of turn to the left, there is a rock that's that's right there on the chart.
Yeah.
Maybe if you put it kind of like near there, it would serve dual purposes of, kind of keeping people away from that rock.
Kind of like the East Buoy on Fish Island.
Yeah.
Same sort of thing.
Yeah.
Sure.
And then, but I think to me, Ziegler's is different from a lot of places, which is you have a lot of nighttime after partying traffic there. So if we put it too close to in the channel, it will probably get run over.
I thought about that also.
Can I make a comment on that though? If you have a 5-mile-an-hour buoy that is near a rock, shouldn't it say rock too, or maybe there's a rock buoy there and a 5-mile-an-hour somewhere else, but you don't,
right? Yeah, I'm trying to have it.
But you don't indicatively think that a 5-mile-an-hour buoy would be in the same location as a rock. Like you would think it'd be kind of near a channel, like in the road, it's in the middle maybe. But I don't know. If you draw 4 or 5 or 6 feet, that rock could do some damage, and if you're going by it slowly or quickly,
it doesn't have to be like right on top of it. It could be to the north of it, but so that you tend to.
Yeah. Anyway, that was just my.
I mean, it's something that I guess I could look into about a rock buoy. I don't want to put a buoy on every corner in Darien Harbor, but like Flip was talking about before, or I said before, that 5-mile-an-hour buoy is always sort of sufficed as a 5-mile-an-hour and a rock buoy. It doesn't say rock on it, but stickers are cheap. You might be able to put one on that.
Totally,
Yeah. I've given some thought to kind of resurrecting the mooring field or moorings north of the Darien Boat Club. It was something that was sort of put to bed when the club was thinking about expanding. The problem up there is the contractor that has agreed to service that area in the past is quite a ways away. I've reached out to the Norotan Yacht Club to see if there's any interest in maybe going back up in that area again. It's only been mentioned, nothing's been formalized. Flip and I have talked about it a little bit. I think it's a good place for very shallow draft skips. Some of the boats that have gotten up there in the past, that are up there now, I more than likely would like to move because they're too heavy, they're too much draft. And when you get, new moon and full moon tides, many of those boats are on the bottom. It's probably a good place for like whalers, really shallow draft boats. There's a couple of boats up there that are, inboard, outboard. May or may not be able to get in and out of there at low tide. Yep.
So John, wouldn't that be a decision for the boat owner?
Well, you're really not supposed to be having a boat rest on the mud.
Oh, okay.
Technically.
Once again,
Yeah.
is it recent fill or is it?
I can't contribute to the
Yeah.
to the situation, so
All right.
I think I said boats not registered, boats not permitted. I came across a number of boats this
John,
summer.
just one
Yeah.
thing, just for the group. You had, in that same area north of the boat club, you had at one point asked if Norotan would kind of use our mooring barge and go up there and pick up some of the, what I'll call derelict moorings, and kind of clean the place up, because there's a lot of kind of crap in the water.
Yeah.
Which I think at some point, maybe over the winter, we're happy to do. If we do that, I'll let everybody know, and if you're welcome to come out and just, hey, we don't need a lot of help, but to just watch, it's kind of interesting to see, see how it all happens.
Yeah, I might find my mooring that got lost in there
Yeah.
at one point in time.
Yeah, there's been stuff, I know there's stuff that the Darien Boat Club has pulled out of there. Some of it was actually deadly, the condition some of the stuff was in. Sharp shanks that were up to needle sharp and dangerous.
Yeah.
But those, I'm under the impression that much of the tackle up there hasn't been maintained properly for quite some time now. Yeah, so some of the challenges I had here, boats not registered, boats not permitted. There's a few people in the harbor that I know the boats have been there for a long time. I don't have them in the harbor master system. I'll be reaching out to them over the winter to get them logged into the system and be part of the process. I know many of those boats have been there for quite some time. I've seen them in the harbor. I don't know what happened. I don't know what was remiss, but I'll be getting them into the system and get them properly permitted. One of the things I'm going to be doing over the winter, and probably with a lot of emphasis, is the wait list for Norotan Bay. There's like 44 people on the wait list for Norotan Bay. Very few of them, it appears at first glance, actually live in Norotan Bay. Now, it's not prerequisite that you have to live in Norotan Bay in order to have a mooring over there, but it's the question of access. If you don't belong to the Norotan Bay Association, you're not allowed to use their pier. What is your method of access? That leaves you just the kayak racks over at Wheat Beach. I've had the opportunity to speak to a few people that are on the list, and there's some confusion about what's Norotan Bay, what's Darien Harbor. Some people are just throwing their name on the list thinking there's only 44 on this list, and there's 180 something on this list. A lot of those people, what they're failing to understand is if I award you or permit you for that area, how are you getting to your boat? And many of them scratch their head and, I hadn't thought about that. So I know there's quite a few people on the Norotan Bay list that that probably won't want to be on the list any longer once there's some education introduced to them. That's, I could go on for more, but I think that's pretty much a good synopsis.
Do you have a sense of the number of people on these lists that have boats versus those that do not?
Well, one of the things that I implemented to the waitlist process is I've added new categories on the waitlist, and it is people. There's always been Darien, Norotan Bay, Ziegler's Cove. Run down the list of the 5 or 6, mooring areas we have. I've added to this now waitlist at Darien Harbor without boat. They still hold position based on when they've been approved, just like people who do have boats. But it helps give me an indication, because based on what I saw this summer when I had a few open moorings that I could give out, and I started going down the list. Oh, great. Do I have to have a boat to get the permit? I go, yeah, that's the general idea. Well, I sold my boat several years ago. So I got probably 25 deep into the list, and I only had about 3 or 4 people get back to me. One person who really gave it a hard thought and a look at the last moment declined. So I imagine my conversations over the winter and also requiring the permits is really going to expose who has a boat, who doesn't. I assure people that there's no difference. There's nothing that's going to change. It's just that when you are on a list without a boat and you're approaching the top of the list, that lets me know that I need to give you a call and tell you you're approaching the top of the list. There's a good chance you may get a mooring this year. You need to get a boat and a boat soon, or I'm going to move down to the next person. And some people will act on that, some people will not.
So, John, just a couple questions. With regard to that wait list, do you give people like a 1-year buy and say, well, you don't have a boat this year, but we'll keep you on for next year, or anything like that? Or for 1 more year?
Another thing that I'm trying to tackle is after that one person that I spoke about who gave me the runaround and then finally declined.
Right.
I found out talking to Tom Bell afterwards, she's declined him more than once in the past.
Got it, okay.
So some people, there are notes in the system that they've declined offers in the past.
Right.
Some are not.
Right.
Doesn't the boat club do that?
Yeah. The boat club gives actually a one strike, and then the second strike, it's like, okay, sorry, we're taking you off the list for 3 years. But the other question I had was, do the launches, respectively the boat club and the yacht club, do they service Norotan?
Bay?
Okay. Yeah, Bay? No. Okay.
No.
Yeah, I was just curious.
So I have had, not a lot, but I have come across a few instances of Norotan Yacht Club members who may or may not live in Darien. They see the Norotan Yacht Club in Darien Harbor. They assume Darien Harbor is Norotan Bay because that's where Norotan Yacht Club is.
Right.
And I explained to them,
the
no,
bay is
this
the one.
Darien Harbor.
It's the
Norotan Bay
inside.
is the other one, and the launch,
Schmitty's dock is Norotan Bay.
and the launch doesn't go over there. Oh,
Yeah.
and then I take them off the
Right.
Norotan Bay list.
Got it, okay.
Yeah, there's a number of things to look at. This is this is a marathon, not a race, not a sprint. But I made some good headway. I made some discoveries. It's it is what it is. I'm gonna work through it. Well, like I said, the ordinances need to be updated. I've been working with one of the selectmen. I've actually taken one of the selectmen out on a couple of harbor cruises to show him what's going on and how things are, and not a boater, so try and help him understand what the challenges are.
Great. Thanks, John. Appreciate that. That was a thorough update. We're running a little over, but I wanted to ask you if you would bring up the, well, you can bring up whatever you'd like, we're in the other business section, but I've been pursuing Wayne Fox on the decoupling of the dredging from the Pear Tree Point project because of CT Deep's tying it with some non-conforming docks, which I just thought was a real aggressive move on their part, and I was bothered by that, and I want to do something about that. If that'd be something you could give a couple-minute explanation of, I think you'd do a more succinct job than I about describing what's happened.
Yes, well, yeah, I was going to update that we did, in fact, a few weeks ago, get the approval from CTD for the Pear Tree Point project, which includes reworking the parking lot to raise certain sections to address the flooding, where water comes in basically from underneath and back up, to redo the boat ramp, and do, we actually would be extending the beaches, reducing the parking lot somewhat, extending the beaches a little bit more, both on the west side and the south side, etc. So the plan was finally approved. It took 2 years. The permit is good for 5 years. Part of the application included dredging from the boat ramp up around, I don't know the letters of those docks, but the docks closest to Pear Tree Point Road, up and around and scooting back down into the channel. The feeling was, we're going to go through this process, let's get all the approval at once. What came out just before they were about to issue their approval is that they noticed that some of the floats, they noticed one in particular, but they noticed that a float that's attached to a dock seemed to be larger than what was permitted back in, I think it was the late 80s or the early 90s. It was about twice the size. And
This
John,
is a boat club dock?
no, a private residence.
Private residence.
John was good enough to go out with a tape measure under cover of darkness or whatever, and discovered in fact that yes, that one was probably twice as large.
I can't remember the exact dimensions, but
quite a bit bigger.
that dock was tied to the normal, whatever is it, 10 by 10, and that one was, I don't know, 10 by 17.
Something like that. It was twice as much. I think you determined that there's probably 2 or 3 others that are also.
Yeah, there's 2 other docks that are not in compliance either. They're actually a bit larger than the one that is causing the problems for your permitting.
Right. So we had a couple options with about a week, and one was to get the property owner to remediate the situation within the week, which obviously was not going to happen, or be to amend the application to cut off a little bit of an edge of the dredging, which is what we did. So the dredging permit was completed, just kind of cutting off like a corner of the area that was in the original dredging plan.
So I think there were 3 dredging areas.
I want to say 4, but don't hold me to it.
And it would just the maybe northern and western sides were,
Yeah.
so facing those docks, if you will.
Well, no, and up and around, and then up and around.
You got the up and around.
We got out the up and around, cutting off this like one corner.
Oh, so this is a betterment. Yeah,
Right.
I'd like to see that on a chart.
Right.
Yeah, so.
At our meeting on this Wednesday, day after tomorrow, which is at 7:30, Dan Biggs from Weston and Sampson is going to kind of go over everything again with the commission, just because it's been a couple years and we have some new members, just to kind of refresh everybody's memory of like what's in the scope and like why are we doing this and why is the parking lot an issue and all of that. So Dan's going to be presenting using GoToMeeting, so if you guys I think we updated the agenda to have that link, or you can come, or you can watch the recording after the fact. But Dan's really going to go through the specifics of the project again.
When is that starting?
Wednesday evening at 7:30. And then, so the commission now, we're in the process of working on the recommended budget, both our operating and our capital planning budget for the next 6 years, but with a focus on fiscal '24, which is next July 1st. So we'll be having to come to a conclusion about prioritizing this project versus other projects in town. We're working on doing some more, project at Wheat Beach as well, just to finish that area, kind of closest to Rowan Bay. The town bought the property 10 years ago. So we have to really think about the order of things, because they know we won't get the money, and the staff doesn't have the capacity or the commission to do both at once. So we really have to think about prioritization, and that's where, public input, the boat club, I think you guys, Tom, if you're stakeholders about, the importance of getting that ramp fixed sooner than later, which there seems to be consensus that really is important, but, you get people who are kind of non-boaters, and they're like, why do we have to spend all this money to, you have a boat ramp, so.
I'll make a point here. This commission, about 8 or 9 years ago, it's quite a while ago, lobbied to have the boat ramp refurbished. And so what's happening here, maybe it's not funded and executed on yet, but it became, because of this commission's actions, incorporated in the town plan for the refurbishment of Pear Tree Park. And it could have easily not been the case because of these very objections you're talking about. So that's been a success. I think that's nice.
But Dan does feel that you really have to do the work on the parking lot, the raising the park lot, to successfully fix that angle.
Yeah, that'd be, ideally,
Right, you can't just, because people have asked questions, well, can't we just fix the boat ramp and not do the rest of the parking lot? He said it's really not going to work to do that, to get it right, so it really has to be done. So it's really going to be prioritization. The whole project, he said, probably minimum numbers 3 million. He said it probably would be more than 5. I think I'd shared with you that the dredging, because the soil samples were not what they should be, can't be dumped in Long Island Sound, and the dumping site, that could add $600,000 or $700,000 to the project. So.
Yeah. Just a quick question.
Yes.
I know it's not your responsibility, but was the boat club ever invited to piggyback in on perhaps some dredging that they might need to do? I don't know.
Well, I
because
think
I'm
that's
sort
what's
of
going to
waiting.
have to be talked about. And I mentioned to Bill, I said at some point, I think the Parks and Rec Commission, we get the ramp in and you dredge what you need to fix the ramp, but after that, I don't think it's not the Parks and Rec Commission's scope. I think it's really the town, and I think the boat club are big stakeholders, but it's really the town saying, okay, what else do we feel really needs to be dredged?
Right, because the inside of that sort of D-dock towards the beach side, I mean, that could use dredging, and I've recommended to the current boat club Flagstaff to get in touch with you guys, and I don't know if they have or not, but I'm sort of bye-bye.
Right after we got
I'm
the
starting to phase
approval,
out.
we had a conference call. Dan Biggs went over the approval with myself, the chairs of the Pear Tree Point Building Committee, Monica, Kate Bush, and Tom Bell were on that call.
Oh, Tom
And
Bell
that
was
was within the last 2 weeks.
Oh, okay.
So he's aware.
All right.
What this commission's generally had interest in, because we were the people to start the harbor channel surveying every 3 years, is the whole route that gets you to the boat launch. So in some sense, there's some areas of the dredge zone which we're not so concerned about because they're Darien Boat Club. But to the extent that's going around on a route to get you to the launch, that was our concern, and that's what we've instituted, the every 3-year dredging depth review.
So we have up to 5 years. You can apply for an extension, it won't come to that, but, so we're kind of off and running in terms of figuring out what the timing and the priorities are for the town, but it's good news. It took 2 years, took a long time. If people really want a new boat ramp, they need to speak up as we go through the budget process and really, communicate to the selectmen again, who I don't know if they're voting crowd or not, but.
And for those of you who don't know, using that ramp's always been a rather dangerous thing. If you've watched people use it, they're jetting their boats onto the ramps because you can't get to the trailer deep enough in the water safely, or you're
At super low tide.
or you're putting your brakes on so your boat slides off. So you watch people doing that, and there's a whole bunch of unsafe practices. And that's all because the ramp is at the wrong angle. It was refurbished at the wrong angle.
I don't know. I'm sort of amused by that because I've never had a problem once, but I do look at the tides before I bring my boat in.
I watch a lot of YouTube videos about boat launch ramps.
Yeah.
They are perfectly good, and they're still idiots.
Yeah.
It's not the ramp that's the issue.
Well, one concern though that I brought forward is, again, if you can time the tides, that's all
If it's
well
low
and good.
tide, you're in trouble.
But if we have a significant storm event,
Right.
and all the boat club boats need to come out in a very short amount of time, and you have big windows, and, you know, the low tides are during the day.
Good point.
Because years ago, when we had our Mako, you know, there was a hurricane coming, we wanted to get it out,
Yeah.
and the tide was low, and the back wheels of my car went off the ramp and into the mud, and luckily it was powerful enough, we were able to get her back up and over, but I mean, I'd have the whole thing go clunking down
With the hurricane coming.
with a hurricane coming.
And the fact is, a lot of boat owners don't check. I mean, they're just not, and there is a standard out there, there's actually a national standard, and ours is not constructed to that
To
standard.
the standard, but it would be
It
a
was
concern if a
basically
lot of
brand new
boats had to come
20
out,
years ago.
I think, but maybe other people disagree with it, but it seems to me that in a situation, we've got 48 hours, how many boats are at the boat club?
What's the cost?
238.
Yeah, if you've got to get hundreds of boats out in a very short period, and you have,
What's the estimated cost of the ramp?
I don't know that I have the breakout for that piece,
It'd be nice to know.
you know, but again, Dan says you really can't do it without doing,
Not the whole part, but just the section where there would be.
well, you do the whole thing at once, you can't raise part of the lot.
So those are two big price tags that probably people ought to probably understand. It's all related to timing the
Yeah.
tide right to get your boat out.
Right.
It's gonna cost this much for a ramp and the whole parking lot.
Well, it's
a big
also
number.
resilient, it's also resiliency for the property. I mean, there's a lot of different pieces to it, but there's also resiliency for the property and building it up and preparing for the future.
So if you all are looking for public input as part of your prioritization process, could you or we just send some sort of note to people who are mooring holders, not mooring holders, but boat ramp sticker holders, saying that this is a project that's now been approved, but it is, you know, subject to budgeting, prioritization, and please let Parks and Rec know if you feel strongly about this. And so that, because otherwise people won't, I find our town newspapers these days don't
There's almost
actually
nothing.
cover anything.
No, there's
And
almost
so if you
nothing.
don't do direct outreach, nobody knows anything.
Is that something that we should join in, some, either co-signature, or I'm trying to think of the advocacy versus,
Well, and/or the boat club, because it is my understanding that many boat club members do not actually purchase a boat launch sticker, which they
That's
should,
the traffic at 6 o'clock in the morning.
because they launch
Well,
before,
that's it.
we only have a guard there from Memorial to Labor Days, and they tend to launch before and pull after. This came to light during COVID when we had the park actually physically closed. So unfortunately, boat club members probably aren't on our list because they're not purchasing their sticker, which I think we should remediate. but-
I'd be happy to send out an email blast to all the slip holders at the Darien Boat Club, and the launch holders for that matter.
Yeah.
that's great.
But if, maybe it would make sense if Parks and Rec wants to create a memo and update, some sort of almost
Yep.
like press release, saying
Yep.
this is what's going on and we could use input.
Yeah,
Then actually,
Great idea, but-
we can forward it through Norotan, we can forward it through the boat club,
Yep.
through your own databases, you
Yeah.
can forward it.
yeah, because we've got a big database as well. Yeah, but you're right, I want to say 9 months ago or so, there was a woman who joined the Darien Times, who was actually covering Park and Rec, and, you know, she did do a couple articles on different things for us, and she would call me with questions, and then she had a lot of bylines in the Advocate as well, and she's gone, she's just disappeared, so. You're right, we're getting no coverage whatsoever. So, the communications, you know, we do have the new, the Selectmen's newsletter goes out every couple of weeks, so,
That's
you know,
been good.
yeah, that's been good, we can get some things in there as well.
Are you gonna put the results of the survey out that people took on Pear Tree?
Yeah, they're out,
You did that?
yeah, we reviewed them at our last meeting.
It's not public, no. I mean,
No, it was public, we discussed it at the meeting.
So how did that go?
We had excellent response. I was 2,800 responses, really strong response. And, you know, people would like to see the property fixed up, better landscaping, freshen up the bathhouse. doesn't seem to be strong demand for a concession, which we've also seen in the concession. We've had 3 different operators the last 3 years, and just, people just aren't going down there buying food. Weed Beach, she does wonderfully.
Yeah.
Wonderfully. A lot of hot dogs and chicken nuggets are getting sold at Weed Beach, but, so there's,
Any idea why there's such a difference between the 2 beaches?
I think because Weed is a much more active property, because there's tennis, there's the big playground.
Yeah, playground.
There's
Playground's
the,
key, I think.
we have a company that comes and rents stand-up paddle and kayaks. People have their kayaks there, although there are down there too. So I think people are going to just do a lot more things. So I think just they're there more for longer periods of time in the day. It's just, there's just a ton of activity down there, where Pear Tree seems
There's
to
more
be a
people,
lot
right? I mean, in general, there's more people.
quieter. Yeah, it's just.
More people, more kids too. 'cause
And
of
more
the
kids
playground.
because of the playground. Also, a lot of the town camps will bring the kids down to Weed Beach, and they'll all go buy their food and whatever, so.
Okay.
She did really, really well. I think her revenues were something like 90,000 this year at Weed Beach, and I think at Pear Tree it was like 3,000 maybe. And I think the whole month of August, it was like $250. I mean, no joke, it was like basically nothing.
Big difference.
A big difference. So she sold a lot of ice cream and water. But then the ice cream guy was going and parking along Pear Tree Road, and I think he was sort of sucking some of her business too, so it was kind of tricky.
But the ice cream truck was coming into Pear Tree Point too.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that probably pulled some business.
Two very different,
They're
two
just
very
different
different
vibes.
levels of operation too.
Yeah.
I mean, the person who's running, is it Nikki who's doing?
Nikki didn't do it, Nikki does weed.
She does weed,
She
yeah.
tried Pear Tree last year,
Yeah.
was there for maybe a month, and she said, I can't,
Oh.
I'm losing too much money, so she wouldn't even bid on it this year. So a local woman, and her college-age son was a business major, thought they'd try to make a go of it, and it just,
Interesting.
the activity just wasn't there. So I think it's just a different vibe. I think more people go down in the evening and bring their own picnics to the picnic area, and that's what we do. We go down there, use the grills, because it's a nicer place if you want to grill yourself than to go to Weed Beach where the grills are kind of way off. But that's what people said. They just want nicer bathrooms. They don't care about a snack bar. Add some landscaping, chairs, tables. Keep it simple.
We good?
Motion to adjourn.
That was very helpful, thank you,
Yeah,
appreciate that. Yeah, if we're all good, no other business, and a motion to adjourn has been made, so if you're all good, we will adjourn. Nice last meeting, and we'll see you all in February, and I'll talk to some of you more on the phone about other roles on the commission.